A young woman left a baby at the Vampire King's gate. The note said, "You promised to protect us, don't break it." But the king didn't know the child existed. And the woman who left her wasn't coming back. The rain fell steady that night, a cold, persistent drizzle that turned the ancient stones of Thorn Palace slick and black as polished glass. Storm clouds swallowed the moon whole, and the mist rising from the obsidian gate curled like smoke through the silver lanterns that had burned for centuries without flame. Darius Thorne stepped out from the inner sanctum of his throne room, the weight of sleepless eternity heavy in his bones. He had spent the last 3 hours listening to petty disputes between noble houses, watching ambitious lords circle one another like wolves. Politics. Betrayal wrapped in silk and flattery. It never ended. He needed distance. Air. Even immortals could feel suffocated. Welcome back, my beautiful family and friends. If you're hooked in and you're ready to enjoy the story, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because tomorrow I will be giving you another story just as interesting as this one. And you don't want to miss it. Now, let us begin. The courtyard stretched before him, empty and silent except for the rhythmic patter of rain against stone. His long silver hair, unbound for the first time that evening, clung to the collar of his midnight blue coat as he moved through the archway toward the outer grounds. His sentinels were scattered at their usual posts. Cale Morin stood near the armory gate, one hand resting on the hilt of his blade, his sharp gaze cutting through the darkness like a predator's. Silas Varon lingered by the library entrance, a tome half open in his hands, though Darius knew he was watching everything. And Rowan Blackthorn, silent as death itself, leaned against the watchtower wall, a shadow among shadows. It was Rowan who moved first. He straightened, head tilting slightly as if hearing something the wind had not yet carried. Then his voice, low and rough, cut through the night. "Your Majesty." Darius stopped. The formality in Rowan's tone was rare. "Dangerous." Cale appeared from the left, crossbow forgotten, his expression tight. Silas closed his book with a snap and approached from the right. All three converged on the outer gate, without a word. "What is it?" Darius asked, though his senses were already reaching outward, tasting the air for blood, magic, or threat. "Something at the threshold," Cale said, voice edged with confusion. "Not a weapon, not a body. Then what?" Silas met his gaze, unreadable. "You should see for yourself." Darius moved past them, his stride controlled but swift. The obsidian gate loomed ahead, its iron filigree woven with protective wards that hummed faintly in the rain. Beyond it, barely visible through the mist, something rested on the uppermost step. At first glance, it looked like an abandoned offering. Merchants sometimes left tributes at the gates of vampire lords, hoping for favor or mercy. But as Darius drew closer, the shape clarified. A wicker basket. Rain dripped from its curved handles. A rose-colored blanket, soft and worn, was tucked carefully inside. And beneath it, nestled in the folds of fabric, was a child. Darius froze. She looked to be just over a year old. Her cheeks were flushed from the cold, round and healthy despite the chill. Golden curls peeked out from beneath a small knit cap, damp from the drizzle. Her tiny hand rested against a stuffed creature, some kind of cloth rabbit with mismatched button eyes. A pacifier hung loosely from her mouth, rising and falling with each soft breath. The sentinels said nothing. The rain fell harder. Darius crouched slowly, his crimson eyes fixed on the sleeping infant. She looked so impossibly fragile, so utterly out of place at the gate of a king who had ended wars with his bare hands. Then Cale's voice, barely a whisper. "There's a note." Darius reached past the child's foot, fingers closing around the folded parchment tucked beneath the blanket. The paper was damp but intact. He pulled it free and unfolded it with deliberate care. The handwriting hit him like a blade between the ribs. He knew that script, the slant of the letters, the hesitant stroke of the pen. "Her name is Orin. She is yours. You promised to protect us, don't break it." Darius read the words once, twice, 3 times. The rain blurred the ink slightly, but the message remained clear. Unmistakable. Impossible. Your Majesty? Silas's voice was cautious, probing. Darius didn't answer. His gaze returned to the child, Orin, and this time, he truly looked. The curve of her mouth, the shape of her small, pointed chin, the way her lashes rested against her cheeks, dark and long, and the hair, that golden hair, fine as silk, curling slightly at the ends. He had seen that color before, in the firelight, in moonlight, in the moments before dawn when he should have let her go, but didn't. His hand hovered over the basket, trembling, a tremor so faint that only centuries of self-control kept it from spreading further. Then, without deciding to, he reached down and lifted the child from her nest of blankets. She was warm, real, impossibly light in his arms. And the moment his skin touched hers, something inside him shifted. A faint echo, a rhythm beneath her heartbeat that mirrored his own dormant pulse. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but undeniable. Vampire blood recognized its own. Darius's breath caught. His vision narrowed. The world reduced itself to the weight of this child in his arms, and the note still clutched in his other hand. "Search the perimeter," he said, his voice hollow. "Now." Kale and Rowan vanished into the mist without question. Silas remained, studying Darius with quiet intensity. "Do you know her?" Silas asked carefully. Darius didn't answer. He looked out past the gate, past the iron bars and warding stones, into the storm-soaked night beyond. There was no one there. No figure standing in the rain. No shadow fleeing into the trees. Just the empty road, the silent forest, and the lingering scent of wildflowers and smoke clinging to the blanket in his arms. She had been here, and she was already gone. "Bring the basket inside," Darius said quietly. "Everything in it, and summon the palace seers." Silas hesitated. "Your Majesty." "Do it." Without another word, Darius turned and carried the sleeping child back through the gate, past the courtyard, into the warmth of the palace. Hours later, Darius sat alone in his private chamber. The fire burned low in the hearth, casting flickering shadows across the stone walls. Orin had finally fallen asleep on the velvet couch near the window, wrapped in the same rose-colored blanket she had arrived in. Her small chest rose and fell in perfect, trusting rhythm. Darius had not moved from his chair. The note rested on the desk before him, its words seared into his memory. "You promised to protect us, don't break it." His jaw tightened, his hands curled into fists. He closed his eyes, and the child's face, the curve of her hair, the shape of her mouth, dragged him backward through time. To another storm, another night, another promise. To a woman with wild eyes and trembling hands who had looked at him not as a monster, but as her last hope. Alara. The name tasted like ash and regret. It had been over 2 years since that night. The night his kingdom nearly fell. The night he saved her from execution and swore an oath he was forbidden to keep. And now, lying asleep in his chamber, was the proof of every choice he had made and every vow he had broken. Darius opened his eyes and stared at the sleeping child. "Who are you?" he whispered. But he already knew. She was his. And somewhere out there in the rain-soaked darkness, the woman who had left her was running for her life. Darius turned the note over in his hands, studying the back as if some hidden truth might reveal itself in the empty parchment. The ink had bled slightly where rain had touched it, softening the edges of her words, but not their weight. "You promised to protect us, don't break it." He looked back at the child, Orin, still asleep on the couch. Her small hand had slipped free of the blanket, curled into a loose fist near her cheek. Golden curls framed her face, catching the firelight in a way that made them seem almost luminous. That color. Darius's chest tightened. He had seen that exact shade before, tangled in his fingers, spilled across a pillow, glowing in the light of a dying fire. The memory rose like a tide he could no longer hold back. 2 years earlier, the pyre stood in the center of the village square, wood stacked high and soaked in oil. The crowd pressed close, their faces twisted with righteous fury, torches held aloft like weapons. And bound to the stake at the center of it all was a young woman, her wrists raw from the ropes, her dress torn and streaked with mud. Alara Winter. Darius had heard her name whispered in the halls of his court weeks before, a human healer accused of treating a wounded vampire scout. The crime was considered a collaboration, treason, consorting with monsters. The penalty was fire. He had ignored it at first. Human justice was brutal and swift, and he had learned long ago not to interfere in their affairs unless treaty lines were crossed. But this execution was different. It was happening on contested ground, land claimed by both human lords and vampire territories under the Treaty of Ashen Accord. And the accord was explicit: no executions without neutral arbitration. They were breaking the treaty. Publicly. Definitely. So Darius came. He arrived as the torches were lowered toward the pyre, his form materializing from the shadows like smoke given shape. The crowd recoiled instantly, cries of alarm rippling through them as the vampire king stepped into the firelight. He was alone. He didn't need an army. Stop. His voice cut through the square, like a blade, through silk. The torchbearers froze mid-motion, their hands trembling. Darius's crimson gaze swept over them with cold, deliberate precision. This execution violates the Treaty of Ashen Accord. Release her. The village elder, a gaunt man with a priest's collar, stepped forward, defiant despite the fear shaking his voice. She conspired with your kind demon. She has forfeited her right to. She is under my protection, Darius interrupted, his tone dropping to something darker, something that made the air itself feel heavier. By the ancient right of sanctuary, I claim her life as mine to judge. Silence. The elder's mouth worked soundlessly. Around him, the crowd began to back away. Darius moved forward, ascending the pyre steps with inhuman grace. He tore through the ropes binding Alara as if they were made of paper, catching her as she collapsed forward into his arms. She looked up at him, eyes wide with terror and confusion, her lips forming a single word: monster. Darius held her gaze for a long moment. Then, without a word, he turned and carried her into the night, leaving the humans to their broken pyre and shattered courage. She woke 3 days later in a small chamber within Thorn Palace, bandaged and cleaned, but still wary as a cornered animal. Their first conversation was a clash of fire and ice. You saved me so you could kill me yourself, she accused, sitting upright despite the pain in her wrists. If I wanted you dead, Darius replied from the doorway, you would be. Then what do you want? Nothing. Liar. He almost smiled at that. Almost. Over the days that followed, Alara recovered slowly. She argued with him constantly about his methods, his court, the cruelty of his laws. She called him arrogant, cold, and inhuman. And yet, she stayed, because she had nowhere else to go. Gradually, the arguments softened into conversations. She asked questions about his kingdom, about the history etched into the palace walls. He answered, at first tersely, then with something that resembled patience. One night, she found him walking the moonlit gardens, and she joined him without asking permission. You're not what I expected, she said quietly. And what did you expect? A monster. Darius glanced at her, his expression unreadable. I am. No, Alara said, meeting his gaze without flinching. You're something worse. You're a man pretending to be one. Something shifted between them that night. The walks became routine. She learned the names of his ancestors, the wars that shaped his reign, the weight of immortality. And slowly, carefully, Darius let the mask slip. He spoke of loneliness, of centuries spent ruling alone, of promises made and broken by those who swore loyalty. And then one night, beneath a sky heavy with storm clouds, she reached for his hand. You don't have to be alone, she whispered. He should have pulled away, should have reminded her of the impossibility of what she was suggesting. Instead, he kissed her, and the world narrowed to nothing but her warmth, her breath, the way she said his name as if it were a prayer instead of a curse. It was 2 weeks later when she told him the truth. They stood on the same balcony where they had first crossed that forbidden line, the night air cool against their skin. "I have to leave," Alara said, her voice tight with fear. "There are people looking for me. Humans who believe I've been corrupted. They call themselves the Crimson Order." Darius's jaw tightened. "Then stay here, under my protection. They won't stop. They'll come for me. For anyone She hesitated, her hand moving instinctively to her stomach. "For anyone connected to me." Darius caught the gesture. His eyes narrowed. "If the day comes when you have nowhere left to run," he said slowly, deliberately, "my gate will always open to you. I will protect you. And any life you carry." Alara's breath hitched. Tears glistened in her eyes. "You can't promise that. I already have." But the council learned of his vow within days. They confronted him in the throne room, their voices a cacophony of warnings and threats. "You cannot bind yourself to a human, Your Majesty. The consequences are mine to bear," Darius said coldly. "She will be your undoing." He didn't answer, because part of him feared they were right. 3 days later, Alara was gone. No note, no warning, just an empty chamber and a faint trace of her scent lingering on the sheets. Darius searched. He sent scouts. He demanded answers. But war erupted on the northern border, dragging him back to the blood and politics he could never escape. And when the fighting finally ended, he stood alone on the balcony where he had made his promise, staring out at the empty horizon. She had chosen to leave, chosen to abandon the protection he offered. Or so he believed. Present. Darius opened his eyes, the memory dissolving like smoke. Oren stirred on the couch, her small hand twitching before settling back into sleep. He looked down at the note again, and this time, the words felt like an accusation. "You promised to protect us, don't break it." She hadn't abandoned him. She had come back, and he had failed her. Darius rose slowly, his movements deliberate as he crossed to the door and pulled it open. Kale stood just outside, ever vigilant. "Find any trace of her," Darius said, his voice low and edged with something dangerous. "Search every inch of ground near the gate. And bring the seers. I want a bloodline test on the child." Kale nodded once and disappeared into the shadows. Darius returned to his chair, his gaze fixed on the sleeping infant who carried his blood and her desperation in equal measure. "I will find you," he whispered into the silence. "And this time, I will keep my promise." The ritual chamber lay deep beneath Thorn Palace, carved from stones so old it predated the kingdom itself. No windows, no torches, only the faint phosphorescent glow of ancient runes etched into the walls, pulsing like a heartbeat in the darkness. Darius descended the spiral stairs with Oren cradled against his chest, her small body warm and trusting in his arms. She had woken briefly during the journey down, blinking up at him with curious eyes before drifting back to sleep. Behind him, Kale and Silas followed in silence. Rowan remained above, guarding the entrance. At the chamber's center stood Myrina, the eldest of the palace seers, a woman who had served 3 vampire kings before Darius and whose eyes had long since turned milky with age and prophecy. She waited beside a stone altar, her gnarled hands resting on its surface. "Your Majesty," she said, her voice like wind through dead leaves. "You bring a child for verification." "I do." Myrina's sightless eyes turned toward Oren, and for a moment, her expression shifted, something between wonder and sorrow. "Lay her on the altar." Darius hesitated. The stone was cold, ancient, stained with centuries of blood rituals. But he stepped forward and gently placed Oren on the smooth surface, keeping one hand beneath her head. She stirred but didn't wake. Myrina moved closer, her fingers hovering over the child's chest. "The test is simple but binding. Your blood against hers. If she is truly of your line, the bond will reveal itself." She produced a small obsidian blade, its edge sharp enough to split a hair. "Your hand, Your Majesty." Darius extended his palm without hesitation. The blade sliced across the skin, a shallow cut that welled with dark crimson blood. Myrina caught a single drop on her fingertip, then turned to Oren. And the child. Darius's jaw tightened, but he nodded. Myrina pricked Oren's tiny finger with practiced precision. The baby whimpered, her face scrunching in protest. But she didn't cry. A bead of bright red blood appeared. Myrina brought the 2 drops together, pressing them onto the center of the altar, where a circular sigil glowed faintly. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the chamber thrummed. The blood drops merged, spreading across the sigil in tendrils of light, crimson and gold intertwining like veins of fire. The runes on the walls blazed brighter, and a low hum filled the air, resonating deep in Darius's chest. Oren gasped softly, her small hand reaching upward. And Darius felt it, a connection, a thread pulling taut between them, vibrating with shared power. It was faint, she was too young, too human, but it was there. Undeniable. Myrina stepped back, her expression grave. She is yours, your majesty. Vampire and human. A child of 2 worlds. Darius stared down at Oren, his hand still resting beneath her head. The shock of it settled over him like a weight he couldn't shrug off. A daughter. His daughter. And Ilarath had known. Had carried this truth alone. Had fled to his gate in desperation, believing he would protect them both. You promised to protect us, don't break it. He had failed. Kale's voice broke the silence. What do we do now? Darius lifted Oren from the altar, cradling her close. We take her home. And we summon the council. The throne room was a cathedral of shadows and cold elegance. Massive obsidian pillars stretched toward a vaulted ceiling, and silver lanterns cast fractured light across the assembled nobles. Darius sat on his throne, Oren asleep in his arms, wrapped in the rose-colored blanket. He had refused to leave her with attendants. If the council wanted to debate her fate, they would do so in her presence. The counselors filled the chamber, 12 of them, ancient and powerful, their faces carved from centuries of ambition and survival. Lord Cadmore spoke first, his voice sharp with disdain. A hybrid, your majesty? You bring a half-blood into this palace and expect us to. I expect you to remember your place, Darius interrupted, his tone glacial. This child is under my protection. That is not a debate. Lady Saran, silver-haired and calculating, leaned forward. Hybrids are forbidden by ancient law. They destabilize the balance between our kind and theirs. They. She is my daughter, Darius said, each word deliberate. And she will be treated as such. Silence rippled through the chamber. Counselor Thane, a broad-shouldered vampire with a scarred face, crossed his arms. And what of the mother? Where is she? Why did she abandon the child? That, Darius said coldly, is what I intend to find out. Kale stepped forward from his position near the throne, holding the wicker basket. We found evidence at the gate. Items left with the child. He appended the basket onto a side table. A tin of formula. Wipes. A stuffed rabbit. And at the bottom, pressed into the woven reeds, a broken wax seal. Silas retrieved it carefully, holding it up to the light. The sigil was unmistakable, a crimson circle bisected by a jagged cross, edges melted, but still legible. The Crimson Order, Silas said quietly. Murmurs erupted among the council. They're fanatics, Lady Saran said, though her tone was oddly measured. They believe hybrids are abominations that will bring about the end of both races. They hunt them, Kale added grimly, and anyone who harbors them. Darius's gaze swept across the council, noting the subtle shifts in expression, some shocked, others unsurprised. Too unsurprised. You seem familiar with their doctrine, Lady Saran, Darius observed. She stiffened. One must know one's enemies, your majesty. Indeed. His eyes narrowed. And yet I wonder how the Crimson Order knew to target this child at all. She was hidden, protected. He paused. Until she wasn't. Lord Cadmore shifted uncomfortably. Counselor Thane avoided his gaze. Darius filed the reactions away, his suspicion sharpening like a blade. The child stays, Darius said, his voice brooking no argument. She will be raised under my protection, in this palace. Anyone who challenges that answer to me. The council exchanged uneasy glances, but said nothing. Darius rose slowly, Orin still asleep against his shoulder. She will need a name, Lady Saran said carefully. For the records. For legitimacy. Darius looked down at the child in his arms, the golden curls, the soft curve of her cheek, the faint glow of dawnlight filtering through the high windows and catching in her hair. Orin, he said quietly. Her name is Orin. The name settled over the chamber like a vow. It means golden dawn in the old tongue, Silas murmured, his scholar's mind catching the reference. Darius met his gaze. It does. There was no mistaking the symbolism. A child born of darkness and light. A bridge between two worlds. Or a spark that would set them both ablaze. Lord Cadmore cleared his throat. The council will deliberate on the matter of hybrid law. We will reconvene in 3 days. You'll reconvene when I summon you, Darius corrected. Until then, this matter is closed. He turned and strode from the throne room, his sentinels falling into step behind him. In the privacy of his study, Darius laid Orin gently in a cushioned cradle one of the attendants had hastily assembled. She stirred but didn't wake, her small hand curling around the ear of her stuffed rabbit. Cale, Silas, and Rowan stood before him, waiting. The council knows more than they're saying, Darius said, without preamble. Some of them recognize that seal too quickly. They know about the order. Perhaps they've even had contact. Silas nodded slowly. I'll search the archives. If there's correspondence, I'll find it. And I'll track Crimson Order movements near the border, Cale said. If they took her, they'll have left a trail. Rowan's dark eyes glinted. And the woman? Find her, Darius said, his voice dropping to something raw. Alive, if possible. I need to know what happened. Why did she run? And why did she come back? The 3 sentinels bowed and left without another word. Darius turned back to the cradle, watching the gentle rise and fall of Orin's breathing. I will find your mother, he whispered, and I will keep the promise I failed to keep before. The fire crackled softly in the hearth. Outside, the storm had finally begun to break. Dawn broke cold and gray over Thorn Palace, the sky still bruised from the previous night's storm. Cale, Silas, and Rowan moved through the outer gate before the first light fully crested the horizon, their boots crunching softly against wet gravel. They worked in silence, each falling naturally into their role. Cale crouched near the obsidian steps where the basket had been found, his sharp eyes scanning the ground for disturbances. His hand hovered over a faint indentation in the mud, small, delicate. A woman's footprint. She stood here, he said, his voice low and edged. Recently. Within hours of leaving the child. Silas knelt beside him, pulling a small vial from his coat and collecting a sample of the disturbed earth. The rain should have washed this away. Something preserved it. He held the vial up to the dim light, noting the faint shimmer of residual magic. Warding herbs. Protective charms. Rowan stood further back, his gaze fixed on the tree line beyond the gate. He said nothing, but his stillness spoke volumes. He was listening not with his ears, but with something deeper. She didn't leave alone, Rowan said finally, his voice rough as stone grinding against stone. Cale rose, jaw tight. Then we follow. The trail led them into the forest that bordered the palace grounds, a dense tangle of ancient oaks and silver birch, their branches still dripping from the storm. The ground was soft, treacherous, but the signs were there for those who knew how to look. Broken branches, displaced moss, and further in, a scrap of fabric snagged on a low thorn bush. Silas retrieved it carefully, holding the torn cloth up to the faint morning light. It was simple linen, dyed a soft gray blue, the kind a traveling woman might wear. Hers, Cale said, recognizing the color from descriptions Darius had given in their late-night briefing. They moved deeper, the forest growing darker as the canopy thickened overhead. The trail became erratic, footprints that doubled back, drag marks through the underbrush, scattered remnants of dried herbs that smelled of sage and iron. She fought, Silas observed, his analytical mind piecing together the struggle. But not against a single opponent. These marks suggest at least 3 assailants. Maybe more. Cale's hand moved to the hilt of his blade, fingers tightening. The order. Rowan stopped abruptly, head tilting. His dark eyes narrowed as he scanned the trees ahead. There, he said. They emerged into a clearing, and the scene before them stilled the air in their lungs. A charred circle dominated the center of the space, burned into the earth with unnatural precision. The grass within it was blackened to ash, and at its heart, a sigil glowed faintly, crimson lines traced in something that wasn't painted. Blood. The same symbol from the wax seal. The mark of the Crimson Order. Cale swore under his breath. Silas approached cautiously, crouching at the circle's edge, without crossing it. A binding ritual, Silas said grimly, used to subdue and transport captives through warded spaces. Rowan moved to the opposite side, kneeling and pressing his palm flat against the scorched earth. His eyes closed, his breathing slowing. For a long moment he was utterly still. Then his eyes snapped open, and his voice came out strained. She was here, moments after leaving the gate. He paused, his hand trembling slightly. I can still feel her heartbeat. Faint. Terrified. And now, Cale demanded. Rowan's expression darkened. Gone. They took her through the circle. There's no trail beyond this point. Cale slammed his fist against a nearby tree, bark splintering under the impact. Damn them. Silas stood slowly, his face pale but composed. We need to bring this back to Darius. He needs to know she didn't abandon the child. She was taken. Rowan nodded, rising to his feet. His gaze lingered on the sigil, and something cold settled in his chest. She came back for him, Rowan said quietly. And they were waiting, somewhere deep beneath the earth, in a place where sunlight had never touched stone. Alara woke to the smell of damp rot and burning wax. Her head throbbed, and when she tried to move, cold iron bit into her wrists. She blinked against the dim light of a single candle flickering on a stone ledge, her vision swimming as the room slowly came into focus. A cell. Narrow. Windowless. The walls were carved with symbols she didn't recognize, but their intent was clear: suppression, containment, control. Her wrists were bound in iron cuffs etched with runes that hummed faintly against her skin, sapping her strength, making even the smallest movement feel like dragging herself through deep water. Awake at last. The voice came from the shadows beyond the candlelight. A figure stepped forward, a man in crimson robes, his face hidden behind a simple cloth mask marked with the Order's sigil. Alara's breath hitched, but she forced herself to meet his gaze. Where is my daughter? Safe, the man said, his tone mockingly gentle. For now. You're lying. Am I? He tilted his head. We watched you leave her at the Vampire King's gate. Watched him take her into his cursed palace. The child is exactly where you left her. Alara's chest tightened. Relief and terror warred within her. He took her. He has her. But the question remained. Would he keep her? The man circled her slowly, his robes whispering against the stone floor. You played your part beautifully, woman. Delivered the abomination directly into his hands. Now he believes you abandoned her. Betrayed him. I didn't. Of course you didn't. His voice hardened. But he doesn't know that, does he? And when we're finished, he'll learn that even love cannot protect the blood-dawn child. She will burn, as all hybrids must. And you, he leaned close, his breath hot against her ear, will be the bait that draws him into the flames. Alara's hands curled into fists despite the iron's weight. He'll kill you all. The man laughed. Perhaps. But not before we make our point. The child is a symbol. Her death will remind both our kinds that some lines must never be crossed. He straightened and moved toward the door. Rest, woman. You'll need your strength. When the time comes, you'll beg the Vampire King to trade his own life for yours. And when he refuses, as monsters always do, you'll see the truth. The door slammed shut, the lock grinding into place. Alara was alone. She let out a shaking breath, tears burning in her eyes, but refusing to fall. She thought of Orin, her golden curls, her soft laughter, the way she reached for Alara's face with tiny, trusting hands. And she thought of Darius, standing at the gate in the rain, holding their daughter for the first time. Did you recognize her? Alara wondered. Did you see yourself in her eyes? She closed her own eyes, exhaustion dragging at her, but her resolve hardened like steel. I will survive this, she whispered into the dark. And I will see her again, even if it meant crawling through fire to do it. Darius stood in his study, staring at the map spread across his desk. Red markers indicated known Crimson Order activity. There were too many, too close. The door opened without a knock. Kale, Silas, and Rowan entered, their faces grim. We found the site, Kale said without preamble. A binding circle. Crimson Order sigil burned into the ground. Silas placed the scrap of fabric and vial of earth on the desk. She was taken. Forcibly. There's no question. Rowan's voice was quieter but no less certain. She never abandoned the child, Your Majesty. She was ambushed the moment she left the gate. Darius's hands curled into fists, his knuckles white against the dark wood. Then they have her. Yes. Silence filled the room, heavy and sharp. Find them, Darius said, his voice deadly calm. Tear apart every known Order stronghold. Burn their temples. I want her found. The 3 sentinels bowed. And if she's already, Kale began. She's alive, Darius interrupted, his crimson eyes blazing. I would feel it if she weren't. He didn't know if that was true, but he needed it to be. Go, he said. Now. They left without another word. Darius returned to the map, his mind racing. Hold on, Alara, he thought. I'm coming. The palace archives stretched deep beneath Thorn Palace, a labyrinth of stone corridors lined with shelves that groaned under the weight of centuries. Dust motes drifted through beams of pale light from enchanted crystals embedded in the ceiling, and the air tasted of parchment and age. Silas moved through the maze with practiced ease, his fingers trailing along spines of leather-bound tomes and scrolls sealed with wax older than most kingdoms. He had been searching for 3 days, sleeping in brief intervals, driven by a question that gnawed at him with increasing urgency. Why would the Crimson Order care about one hybrid child? Fanatics, yes. Extremists who believed in racial purity. But their hatred had always been diffuse, generalized. This felt targeted, personal, as if they had been waiting for this specific child. He found his answer in a section of the archives few had reason to visit, texts predating the Treaty of Ashen Accord, records from the ancient wars between humans and vampires. The tablet was small, carved from black stone, its surface etched with words in a language that had been dead for over a millennium. Silas had to light 3 candles and pull out his translation codex to decipher it. What he read made his blood run cold. In the age when night and day war is eternal, a child shall be born of forbidden union, from a king of endless night and a woman of hunted blood. Her heart shall beat in twin rhythms, neither wholly mortal nor immortal, and in her veins shall flow the power to bridge realms or burn them to ash. The courts of shadow shall tremble. The fires of the faithful shall rise. And the child named for Dawn shall stand at the crossroads of annihilation or rebirth. She is the Blood Dawn, and her coming heralds the end of the old order. Silas read it twice, then a 3rd time, his scholar's mind catching on specific phrases. A kind of endless night. Darius was one of the oldest vampire rulers still reigning. A woman of hunted blood. Alara had been marked for execution, pursued by extremists. Heartbeats in twin rhythms. The bloodline test had confirmed Orin's dual nature, vampire and human intertwined. This wasn't a coincidence. This was a prophecy. And if Silas had found it, others had too. He gathered the tablet and several related scrolls, his hands trembling slightly as he climbed back toward the upper levels of the palace. Darius was in his private study when Silas entered, the scholar's face pale and drawn. Your Majesty, Silas said, his voice carefully neutral. I need to show you something. Darius looked up from the correspondence he'd been drafting, orders to border patrols, inquiries to informants. His eyes narrowed at Silas's expression. "What did you find?" Silas laid the tablet on the desk, along with translations and supplementary texts. A prophecy. Ancient. Specific. He paused. "It's about Orin." Darius's gaze dropped to the stone tablet, and Silas watched as his king read the translated words, his expression shifting from confusion to recognition to something darker. "The Blood Dawn," Darius murmured. "The Crimson Order didn't just stumble upon Alara," Silas said quietly. "They knew, or suspected. This prophecy has been circulating in extremist circles for centuries. They believe the hybrid child will destroy humanity. And our kind?" Darius asked, his voice dangerously soft. "Some vampire courts believe she'll end the aristocracy. Dismantle the old power structures." Silas hesitated. There are factions on both sides who would rather see her dead than risk what she represents. Darius leaned back in his chair, his crimson eyes distant. "A child. My child. And they've already decided her fate based on words carved by someone who died 1,000 years ago." "Your Majesty, is it true?" Darius interrupted, his gaze snapping to Silas. "Does she have this power?" "I don't know," Silas admitted. "Prophecies are notoriously interpretive, but the specifics align too closely to ignore." Darius rose and crossed to the window, staring out at the courtyard below where Orin slept under the watchful eyes of attendants. "Then I have a choice," he said slowly. "See her as a weapon, a threat, or simply as my daughter. And which do you choose?" Darius was silent for a long moment. "She is my daughter," he said finally. "Everything else is noise." But the noise was growing louder. That evening, as Darius walked the council wing to retrieve a document, he heard voices drifting from a half-open door. "Cannot allow the prophecy to unfold unchecked." Darius froze, his hand hovering over the door handle to his destination. "The child is already here, Cadmore. What would you have us do? Contain her? Study her? If necessary, murder her?" Lady Saran's voice was sharp. "That would bring Darius's wrath down on us all. Better his wrath than the end of our civilization." Darius stepped closer, peering through the gap in the door. Four council members sat around a table, and spread before them were scrolls and tablets, some of which Darius recognized from the restricted archives. They had known. They had copies of the prophecy. Annotated copies, with notes in the margins discussing contingencies, risks, potential interventions. "We should have intercepted the woman years ago," Counselor Thane muttered. "Prevented the union entirely." "We tried," Lady Saran said coldly. "Her letters never reached him. We kept them apart for over a year. And still, here we are." Darius's vision narrowed, rage blooming white-hot in his chest. They had intercepted Alara's letters. They had known she was trying to reach him, that she was pregnant, that she needed protection. And they had silenced her. His hand moved to the door, but he stopped himself. Not yet. He needed to know the full extent of their betrayal before he acted. He pulled back into the shadows and left, his mind racing. Late that night, Darius stood in the nursery, a hastily converted chamber adjacent to his own quarters. Orin lay in her cradle, awake for once, her wide eyes following the movement of a mobile one of the attendants had hung above her. Darius reached down and lifted her carefully, cradling her against his chest. She made a small sound, not quite a laugh, not quite a coo, and her tiny hand reached up, fingers brushing against his jaw. And then he felt it, a warmth spreading through his chest, a faint glow emanating from where her hand touched his skin. It lasted only a moment, but it was unmistakable. His own power, reflected and magnified, pulsing gently in response to her presence. Darius's breath caught. She wasn't just his daughter. She was something more. The prophecy wasn't abstract. It wasn't a metaphor. It was her. Over the next 2 days, messages began arriving from neighboring courts. Lord Valen of the Eastern Reaches sent a polite inquiry about rumors of a most unusual child. The Countess of Night Vale requested an audience to discuss matters of mutual concern. Even the neutral territories were asking questions. Darius burned each letter after reading it. He knew what they wanted: confirmation, leverage, or an excuse to move against him. If the truth spread unchecked, the entire Shadowlands could fracture into civil war. But he would not hide Orin, would not apologize for her existence. Let them come. Late one night, unable to sleep, Darius carried Orin down to the obsidian gate where she had been left. The storm had long since passed, and the sky above was clear, scattered with stars. The gate stood silent, its iron filigree gleaming faintly in the moonlight. Darius stood at the threshold, holding his daughter close, and looked out into the darkness beyond. "They want to decide your fate," he murmured. "Councils. Prophecies. Fanatics on both sides." He tightened his grip gently. "But they will have to go through me first." Orin stirred in his arms, her small hand curling around the fabric of his coat. "I failed your mother once," Darius said quietly. "I will not fail you." The wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it the faint scent of wildflowers and smoke, Alara's scent, lingering like a ghost. "Hold on," he thought. "I'm coming for you. And when I find you, we will face this destiny together." Orin's eyes fluttered closed, trusting and peaceful. And Darius stood vigil at the gate, a king against the world, until the first light of dawn touched the horizon. 3 weeks later, Thorn Palace had become a fortress. New wards glowed along every wall, layered in concentric circles of protection. Sentries patrolled in doubled shifts. The gates remained closed to all but essential traffic, and even trusted merchants were searched before entering. Darius had thrown every resource into 2 objectives: protecting Orin and finding Alara. The first was succeeding. Orin thrived in the palace, her laughter echoing through halls that had known only silence for decades. She was adored by the staff, doted on by the sentinels, and never left Darius's sight for long. The second objective had yielded nothing but ash and frustration. Kale's raids on suspected Order strongholds turned up empty cells and abandoned temples. Silas's network of informants went silent or turned up dead. Rowan tracked a dozen false leads through cursed forests and forgotten ruins, each one ending in cold trails and older blood. It was as if Alara had been swallowed by the earth itself. Darius stood at the same window where he'd stood countless nights before, staring out at the storm clouds gathering on the horizon. Another tempest was coming, the 3rd this week. He had almost given up hope of finding her alive. And then, as lightning split the sky and thunder shook the palace stones, he felt it. A heartbeat, faint, stuttering, barely there, but hers. Darius's entire body went rigid. His hand shot out, gripping the windowsill hard enough to crack the stone.
Kale.
Silas. Rowan. His voice cut through the palace like a blade.
Now.
They rode hard through the storm, for shadows tearing across the muddy roads toward the southern border of Darius's realm. Rain lashed at them, turning the world into a blur of gray and black, but Darius didn't slow. He followed the heartbeat like a beacon, fragile and faltering, pulling him forward with desperate urgency. "Don't stop. Don't fade. Stay with me." They found her at the edge of the forest, collapsed in the mud near a creek that had swollen to a torrent from the rain. She lay face down, her dress torn and filthy, her wrists still bearing the raw marks of iron cuffs. Ritual symbols had been carved into her arms and back, crude, vicious, meant to drain and weaken. Blood seeped from the wounds, mixing with rainwater and mud. Darius was off his horse before it fully stopped, crashing to his knees beside her. He turned her over gently, his hands shaking as he brushed the wet hair from her face. Alara. Her skin was cold. Too cold. Her lips were cracked and pale, her breathing so shallow he could barely see her chest rise. But her heart was still beating. "She's alive," Rowan confirmed, kneeling on her other side. "Barely." Kale swore viciously, scanning the tree line for threats. "The Order dumped her here. Left her to die. They wanted us to find her like this," Silas said grimly. "A message." Darius didn't hear them. He gathered Alara into his arms, cradling her against his chest the same way he had carried her from the pyre 2 years ago. Hold on, he whispered into her hair. Just hold on. He rose and turned back toward his horse, his sentinels falling into formation around him. They rode back through the storm, and Darius did not look away from her face once. The healing chamber was warm, lit by dozens of candles and warded against intrusion. The palace's best healer, an ancient vampire woman named Kasha, worked quickly, cleaning wounds, applying salves, murmuring incantations that would slow the bleeding and counter the Order's dark magic. Darius refused to leave. He stood at the foot of the bed, arms crossed, eyes fixed on Alara's still form as Kasha worked. She's lost a lot of blood, Kasha said quietly. And these ritual marks, they were designed to drain her slowly, keep her weak but alive. Will she survive? Kasha hesitated. If she wakes in the next few hours, yes. If not, she'll wake, Darius said, his tone leaving no room for doubt. Kasha bowed and left, closing the door softly behind her. Darius moved to the chair beside the bed and sat, his gaze never leaving Alara's face. Hours passed. And then, as dawn began to break beyond the windows, her eyes fluttered open. Alara woke to warmth and softness, sensations she'd almost forgotten. Her body ached, every muscle screaming, but she was alive. She blinked against the candlelight, disoriented, her mind struggling to catch up. Where? And then she remembered. The clearing. The sigil circle. The Order dragged her away as she watched Darius lift Orin into his arms. Orin, she gasped, trying to sit up. Strong hands pressed her shoulders back gently. Don't move. That voice. She turned her head, and there he was. Darius sat beside her, his crimson eyes fixed on hers, his expression unreadable. Where is she? Alara's voice cracked, desperate. Is she, did you? She's safe, Darius said quietly. Asleep in the nursery.
Healthy.
Protected. Alara's breath left her in a rush, tears spilling down her cheeks before she could stop them. You kept her. You didn't. Did you think I wouldn't? The sharpness in his tone made her flinch. I didn't know, she whispered. I couldn't be sure. The council, the laws, I thought they might force you to... To what? Darius's voice was cold now, anger bleeding through. Kill my own daughter? Cast her out. He leaned forward, his gaze burning. You disappeared, Alara. For over a year. No word. No message. And then you leave her on my doorstep like a secret you couldn't bear to keep. I tried to contact you. Alara shot back, ignoring the pain lancing through her ribs as she pushed herself upright. I wrote you letters. Dozens of them. Begging for help. Begging for sanctuary. I never received them. Because someone made sure you didn't. Her voice broke. I was alone, Darius. Pregnant and hunted. The Crimson Order found me and I ran. I hid for a year, terrified they'd find Orin before I could get her to you. Darius stared at her, his expression shifting from anger to something rawer. Letters, he repeated slowly. Every week for months. Until I realized they were never reaching you. Alara's hands trembled. So, I came myself. But they were watching. Waiting. The moment you took her, they took me. Darius's jaw tightened. The council. What? My council intercepted your letters. I found evidence. His voice dropped to something deadly. They knew. They wanted to prevent this. Prevent her. Alara's breath hitched. Then it was never you. You never abandoned us. And you never abandoned her. The weight of that realization settled over him like a stone. You came back. Even knowing the risk. I had to. Alara's voice broke completely now, tears streaming freely. I couldn't keep her hidden forever. And I knew, if there was even a chance you'd keep your promise, I had to try. Darius reached out slowly, his hand covering hers. I made a vow to you, to protect you, and any life you carry. And you did. She looked up at him, her eyes red but fierce. You took her in. You kept her safe. I failed you.
No.
Alara squeezed his hand. You saved her. That's all that mattered. For a long moment, they sat in silence, the weight of 2 years of misunderstanding and separation pressing down on them both. Finally, Darius spoke. I will find who silenced you, who endangered you both. His voice was quiet but absolute. And they will answer for it. I don't care about them, Elara whispered. I just want to see her. Darius rose and crossed to the door, opening it briefly to murmur something to the sentinel outside. Moments later, an attendant appeared, carrying a sleeping Orin wrapped in her rose-colored blanket. Darius took her carefully and returned to the bed, kneeling so Elara could see. Alara's breath caught. She's so big. She's strong, Darius said softly, like her mother. Elara reached out with trembling fingers, brushing Orin's golden curls. The baby stirred, her small hand reaching up instinctively, wrapping around Alara's finger. Hi, little Dawn, Elara whispered, her voice breaking. I'm sorry I left you. I'm so sorry. She's safe now, Darius said. And so are you. Elara looked up at him, tears streaming. Promise me. No matter what the council says. No matter what prophecy or curse or war comes. I swear it, Darius interrupted, his voice iron. No council, no curse, no prophecy will take either of you from me. I will burn this world to ash before I let them. Elara nodded, exhaustion pulling at her again. Okay. Sleep, Darius said gently. I'll be here. As her eyes drifted closed, Darius remained, Orin in one arm, the original note from the basket in his other hand. You promised to protect us, don't break it. I won't, he whispered. Outside, the storm finally began to break. Silas returned to the archives with renewed purpose, Elara's words echoing in his mind. I wrote you letters.
Dozens of them.
If the letters had reached the palace but never made it to Darius, someone had intercepted them. And if Silas could find them, he would have proof of betrayal at the highest levels. He worked through the night, breaking through wards he'd previously respected, opening sealed sections reserved for council eyes only. The magic resisted him, but Silas was patient, methodical, and utterly relentless. Just before dawn, he found them. A locked cabinet in the deepest archive chamber, warded with council sigils. Inside, bound in red ribbon and marked with dates spanning over a year, were letters addressed to Darius Thorne in Elara's unmistakable handwriting. Silas's hands trembled as he untied the ribbon. The first letter was dated nearly 2 years ago, weeks after Elara had left the palace. Darius, I'm writing to tell you that I'm carrying your child. I know the dangers this brings, but I need you to know. I need your protection. Please, if you ever meant what you said, if your promise was real, help me. Elara. The letter was marked with a council seal and a note in Lord Cadmer's handwriting. Return to sender. Do not deliver. Silas's jaw tightened. He opened the next letter. Darius, I don't know if you're receiving these. I pray you are. The order is watching me. I've had to move 3 times this month. Our daughter will be born soon. Please, I'm begging you. Another council seal. Another cruel notation. Ensure she does not reach the gate. Letter after letter. Plea after plea. Each one intercepted, marked, filed away like evidence of a crime they were proud to have committed. The final letter was dated 3 weeks before Orin appeared at the gate. Darius, I can't hide anymore. If you don't respond to this, I'll have to assume you've chosen not to help us. I'll bring her to your gate myself. I pray you remember your promise.
E.
Silas gathered every letter, his rage cold and precise, and climbed back toward the palace proper. Darius was in Elara's healing chamber when Silas arrived, his arms full of bound correspondence. Your Majesty, Silas said quietly, you need to see this. Darius looked up, noting the tension in his sentinel's posture. He rose carefully, not wanting to wake Elara, and stepped into the corridor. Silas handed him the letters, without preamble. Darius read the first one, then the second, then the third. His expression remained perfectly controlled, but Silas saw the way his hands tightened on the parchment, the way his jaw locked, the crimson glow of his eyes intensifying with each intercepted plea. When he finished, his voice was barely above a whisper. How many? 23, Silas said, spanning 14 months. The council. Every letter bears their seals. Lord Cadmore, Lady Saran, Councillor Thane, they all knew. Darius was silent for a long moment, the letters trembling in his grip. You had no part in this, he said finally, meeting Silas's gaze. None of us did, Your Majesty. The sentinels were kept in the dark. Darius nodded slowly. Then his expression hardened into something terrible. Summon the council. Immediately. Full assembly. Your Majesty.
Now, Silas.
The throne room filled within the hour, council members arriving with expressions ranging from curiosity to carefully masked concern. They took their positions in the semicircle before the throne, whispering among themselves. Darius entered last, his sentinels flanking him. He carried the bundle of letters in one hand. He did not sit. I have made a discovery, Darius said, his voice cutting through the murmurs like a blade through silk. One that explains a great many things. He dropped the letters onto the stone floor before them. They scattered, parchment spreading like accusations. 23 letters, Darius continued. From Alara Winter. Addressed to me. Never delivered. The color drained from Lord Cadmore's face. Lady Saran's expression remained carefully neutral, but her hands tightened on her robes. Your Majesty, Cadmore began. We can explain. You intercepted correspondence meant for your king. Darius's voice dropped to something deadly. You silenced a woman begging for sanctuary. You endangered my child, my daughter, because you feared a prophecy written by dead men. We acted for the realm. Lady Saran stepped forward, her composure cracking. The blood-dawn child threatens everything we've built. We had to prevent. You had to prevent nothing, Darius snarled. Your fear nearly delivered that child into the hands of the Crimson Order. Your arrogance left her mother to be hunted, tortured, left to die in the mud. Councillor Thane raised his chin defiantly. We did what was necessary to protect vampire kind from. From what? Darius interrupted. From a child? From hope. He descended the throne step slowly, deliberately. You protected nothing. You guaranteed the very chaos you feared. The council members exchanged uneasy glances. You have overstepped, Darius said, his voice resonating with ancient power. You have betrayed your oaths, endangered innocence, and conspired against your king. He raised his hand, and crimson fire, kingfire, the mark of true sovereign authority, ignited along his fingers. I hereby dissolve this council. Gasps rippled through the chamber. Your Majesty, you cannot, Lady Saran began. I am king, Darius said coldly. I can do as I wish. The fire spread, racing across the floor in patterns that encircled each council member. It didn't burn them, but it stripped away the sigils of office etched into their robes, dissolving centuries of accumulated authority in moments. Lord Cadmore, Lady Saran, Councillor Thane, you are exiled from Thorn Palace and the Shadowlands. You have one day to leave my realm. This is madness. Cadmore shouted. This is justice, Darius corrected. The rest of you will be investigated. Those found complicit will join them. Those who are merely cowards will be stripped of rank, but permitted to remain. He turned to his sentinels. Kale, Silas, Rowan, you are hereby elevated to the Royal Advisory Circle. Your counsel has proven more valuable than centuries of tradition. The 3 sentinels bowed, their expressions grave but accepting. Let word spread, Darius said, addressing the entire chamber. The Vampire King has chosen his path. Family over politics, truth over tradition. And anyone who threatens my daughter or her mother will face the same fate as those who betrayed us. He turned and strode from the throne room, leaving stunned silence in his wake. Alara was awake when he returned, sitting up carefully with Orin in her arms. I heard, she said quietly. The servants are talking about it everywhere. Darius crossed to her, kneeling beside the bed. I should have done it years ago. You chose us, Alara whispered, her eyes shining. Over everything. There was no choice, Darius said simply. There is only you. And her. Everything else is negotiable. Alara reached out, her hand cupping his face. Thank you. He turned his head, pressing a kiss to her palm. No more hiding. No more secrets. We face what comes together. Together, she agreed. In the shadows of a palace alcove, a figure in servant's garb watched the exchange through a cracked door. They had been embedded in the palace for months, waiting for the right moment to strike. Now, they had everything they needed. The vampire king had committed fully to the hybrid child, had dissolved his council, had chosen the prophecy over stability. The servants slipped through a side passage, making their way toward the outer walls. By dawn, they would be beyond the wards, carrying word back to the Crimson Order. The Blood Dawn child was not only alive, she was protected by the most dangerous vampire in the Shadowlands. The war was no longer coming. It had already begun. For 5 days, peace settled over Thorn Palace like a fragile truce. Alara grew stronger, walking the gardens with Orin bundled against her chest. Darius joined them when he could, his towering presence softened by the way he watched his daughter reach for falling leaves with clumsy fascination. One afternoon, Orin's stuffed rabbit fell from the blanket. Darius retrieved it, and she laughed, a sound so pure it made him pause mid-step, something ancient and cold inside him thawing just slightly. She has your smile, Alara said softly. And your stubbornness, Darius replied, though his tone was fond. These small moments felt stolen from another life. One where kingdoms didn't teeter on prophecies and threats lurked beyond every shadow. It couldn't last. The night of the council reform ceremony, the palace blazed with light. Lanterns hung from every archway, and music drifted through halls that had known only silence for decades. It was meant to signal a new era, transparency, unity, strength. Instead, it became a distraction. While nobles and sentinels gathered in the great hall, crimson-robed figures moved through servant passages, their faces hidden, their movements rehearsed. They had studied the palace for weeks, memorized guard rotations, identified the weak points in newly placed wards. The spy who had watched Darius in the healing chamber had done their work well. At midnight, while Darius stood before the assembly announcing his new advisory council, the infiltrators reached Orin's nursery. The wards flickered once, sabotaged from within, and died. The attendant on duty never screamed. A blade found her throat before she could. By the time the alarm was raised, Orin was gone. Darius felt it before the sentinel reached him, a wrongness in the air, a sudden absence where warmth had been. He turned mid-sentence, his words dying as Kale burst through the doors, his face ashen. Your Majesty, the child. Darius moved before Kale finished, a blur of shadow and fury tearing through the palace toward the nursery. The door hung open. The cradle was empty, and on the wall, painted in blood, was the crimson sigil of the order. Beneath it, a message. The symbol burns at dawn. The temperature in the room plummeted. Frost spread across the windows as Darius's power surged, barely controlled, his eyes blazing like dying stars. Find them, he snarled, his voice inhuman. Burn every order stronghold.
Now.
Your Majesty, we should plan. One of the new advisors began. There is no plan, Darius interrupted, his voice shaking the stones. There is only slaughter. Alara appeared in the doorway, her face pale. Darius. Stay here. You're not healed. I'm going, Alara said, her voice steel. That's our daughter. I know how they think. I know their rituals. You need me. Their eyes met. For a moment, Darius looked ready to refuse. Then he nodded once, sharp and final. We leave now. They rode hard through cursed lands, territories abandoned after the old wars, where magic had soured and twisted the earth. 6 of them. Darius, Alara, Kale, Silas, Rowan, and 2 elite guards. They'll take her to the Temple of First Flame, Alara said as they rode. It's where the Order was founded. They believe burning hybrids there purifies the world. How long do we have? Darius asked, his voice tight. Until dawn. The ritual requires first light. Kale checked the horizon. 2 hours. Maybe less. They pushed harder. The temple rose from the wasteland like a broken tooth, ancient stone columns blackened by centuries of fire, an altar at its center stained with old blood. Torches ringed the structure, and crimson-robed figures moved in formation, chanting in a language that made the air itself recoil. At the center of it all, bound in a ritual circle that pulsed with sickly light, was Orin. She was awake, crying, her small fists reaching toward nothing. Darius's vision narrowed to red. Kale, Silas, disrupt the circle. Rowan, with Alara. Kill anyone who gets close. They moved as one. The battle erupted like a storm breaking. Kale's blade sang through the first line of defenders. Silas hurled alchemical vials that shattered against the ritual stones, cracking the sigils. Rowan became a shadow, intercepting blades aimed at Alara as she pushed toward the center. Darius walked through the chaos like death itself, crushing bone and tearing through flesh with his bare hands. Nothing could stop him. Nothing would. The high priest stood at the altar, arms raised, chanting faster as the circle's power built. The dawn child burns. The prophecy ends. No, Darius said, appearing before him in a blur of motion. It begins. But before he could strike, the ritual reached its peak. Light exploded from the circle, blinding, searing, and Orin screamed. Not in pain, in power. The light split, half golden like sunrise, half shadow like midnight. It tore through the circle, shattering the binding sigils, and surged outward in a wave that threw half the Order's warriors to the ground. Orin floated for a heartbeat, suspended in the impossible convergence of light and dark, before collapsing back onto the stone, gasping but unharmed. The temple fell silent. Even the high priest stared, his confidence fracturing. The blood dawn, Silas breathed. Darius didn't hesitate. He crossed the broken circle and scooped Orin into his arms, cradling her against his chest. She clung to him, whimpering, her small body trembling. I have you, he whispered. I have you. Alara reached them seconds later, her hands covering Orin's head, her tears falling freely. Behind them, the high priest struggled to his feet. This changes nothing. The hybrid is an abomination. Darius turned, his eyes burning. She is my daughter, and if you ever threaten her again, there will be no temple left to burn in. He moved faster than the priest could react, his hand closing around the man's throat, lifting him effortlessly. Tell your order, Darius said, his voice cold and absolute. The era of extermination is over. The next one who touches my family will watch their world burn before they die. He released the priest, letting him collapse, gasping. Run, Darius said, and spread the word. The remaining Order members fled into the wasteland. Darius, Alara, and Orin stood amid the ruins as dawn finally broke over the cursed lands. It's not over, Alara said quietly, holding Orin close. No, Darius agreed. But we've won the battle that mattered. He pulled them both close, his family sheltered in his arms. The prophecy had spoken of destruction. But here, in the ruins of hate, they had chosen something else. Hope. 6 months later, Thorn Palace had transformed in ways no one could have predicted. New banners hung from the towers, midnight blue and gold, replacing the somber black that had flown for centuries. The gates, once sealed and forbidding, now opened regularly to traders, diplomats, and cautious humans who had heard rumors of the Vampire King's reformed court. The oppressive silence that had defined the palace for generations had given way to something warmer. Laughter echoed through the halls. Conversations hummed in the gardens. And at the center of it all, a golden-haired toddler raced through corridors on unsteady legs, chased by sentinels who had faced down armies but couldn't resist her infectious joy. Orin, slow down, Kale called, though his grin betrayed him. She giggled and kept running, her small feet pattering against stone until she collided with Rowan's legs. He caught her effortlessly, lifting her onto his shoulders. Gotcha, little Dawn. She squealed with delight, tiny hands gripping his hair. Silas appeared from the library, shaking his head with mock disapproval. You're all hopeless. The most feared warriors in the Shadowlands, undone by a 2-year-old. She's terrifying, Kale agreed, utterly serious. Far more dangerous than any battlefield. Darius emerged from the council chamber and paused at the sight, his daughter perched on Rowan's shoulders, his sentinels grinning like fools. Something in his chest loosened, warmed. Dada. Orin reached for him, and Rowan handed her over. Darius caught her easily, her weight familiar and precious. Have you been causing trouble? She nodded solemnly, then burst into giggles. Good, he murmured. Keep them on their toes. The new council chamber was smaller, brighter, with windows that let in natural light. Around a table sat 6 advisors, 3 vampires, 2 humans, and Alara. She had taken the formal title of Human Liaison and Keeper of Prophecies, a role she'd carved out through necessity and competence. The scars from her captivity still marked her arms, but she wore them openly now, no longer hiding. The eastern reaches are still resistant, one of the vampire advisors reported. Lord Valen calls the hybrid protections an affront to natural order. Let him complain, Darius said evenly. The law stands. Any hybrid child within my realm is protected. Any who harm them answer to me. The human envoy, a middle-aged woman named Mira, cleared her throat. There are whispers among my people too, Your Majesty. Some still fear what the Blood Dawn prophecy means. Alara leaned forward. Then we show them what it means. Not destruction, but possibility. Orin is proof that 2 worlds can coexist. Some will never accept that, Mira said gently. I know, Alara replied. But we start somewhere. The council adjourned with tentative optimism, though everyone understood the fragility of what they were building. That evening, Darius found Alara in the shaded courtyard where wisteria vines climbed ancient stone walls. Orin sat in a patch of filtered sunlight, stacking wooden blocks with intense concentration. Up, she declared, placing another block. The tower wobbled but held. Very good, Darius said, crouching beside her. Now one more. She tried, tongue poking out in concentration, but the tower collapsed. She looked up at him, eyes wide with dismay. Try again, he said gently. That's how we learn. She nodded seriously and started rebuilding. Alara watched from a bench nearby, her expression soft. She has your stubbornness. And your optimism, Darius replied, rising and crossing to her. A dangerous combination. He extended his hand. Walk with me? Alara took it, letting him lead her to the far end of the courtyard, the same spot where, months ago, she had hidden behind a marble column, watching him discover their daughter. The memory hung between them, bittersweet. I failed you, Darius said quietly, his gaze fixed on the distant gate. For over a year, you reached out and I never answered. You carried our child alone, hunted and afraid, because I was blind to my own counsel's betrayal. Darius. Let me finish. He turned to face her, his crimson eyes intense. I broke my promise, and when you came back, you risked everything, including your life, to give Orin a chance at safety. Alara's throat tightened. You kept her safe. That's what mattered. You matter, Darius said firmly. And I need you to know that I will spend the rest of my existence proving that I will never fail you again. He reached into his coat and withdrew a small velvet box. Alara's breath caught. Darius opened it, revealing a ring forged from silver that seemed to hold starlight within its metal. The craftsmanship was exquisite, delicate yet strong, eternal. Inside, Darius said, his voice softer now. It says, I keep this promise. He knelt before her, not as a king before his subject, but as a man before the woman who had given him everything. Alara Winter, will you stay by my side? Not as my subject, not as a guest in my realm, but as my equal, my queen, my partner in whatever comes. Tears spilled down Alara's cheeks. The world will still come for us. For her. You know that. I do. And there will be courts that refuse to recognize a human queen. Let them refuse. She laughed through her tears. You're asking me to stand beside you in a war that may never end. I'm asking you to stand beside me, Darius said simply. In peace or war, in light or shadow, together. Alara looked at him, this ancient, powerful being who had learned to kneel, to hope, to love, and she knew her answer had never been in doubt. Yes, she whispered. He slipped the ring onto her finger, and she pulled him up, kissing him as the world fell away. A small voice interrupted. Mama? Dada. They broke apart, laughing, to find Oren toddling toward them, her arms outstretched. Darius scooped her up, and Alara wrapped her arms around them both. Oren grabbed each of their hands, her small fingers curling tight, forming a living bridge between darkness and dawn. Later, as twilight deepened into night, the three of them stood on the balcony overlooking the palace grounds. The sun had set, but its last light lingered against warded glass, casting a gentle glow that didn't burn but simply was, a reminder that even darkness could learn to coexist with light. Will it always be this hard? Alara asked quietly, Oren asleep against her shoulder. Probably, Darius admitted. But we'll face it, all of us. Alara leaned into him, and he wrapped his arm around her, sheltering them both. Below, the palace lights flickered to life one by one, lanterns glowing like stars against the gathering dark. A new era was beginning, not one free of conflict or fear, but one built on something stronger than prophecy or tradition. Hope, family, and a promise finally kept. As the first stars appeared overhead, Oren stirred and murmured in her sleep. Little dawn, Darius whispered, and the night, for once, felt less like an ending, and more like a beginning.